The knife was already at her throat when Elena realized she had walked into a trap. She did not scream. Screaming would only bring more danger, and the man holding the blade was not the real threat tonight. The real threat was standing in the shadows behind him, arms folded, watching her with a calm that made her blood run cold. Draven, the king's most trusted beta, the man everyone in the kingdom believed was loyal. "You should not have come here alone," Draven said softly. "But I suppose that is what makes you useful. No guards, no witnesses. Just a foolish young wife who thinks she can save a kingdom that does not even want her." Elena kept her eyes steady. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs, but she forced her voice to stay calm. "If you wanted me dead, you would not be talking. You need something from me first." Draven smiled, and that smile was worse than any threat. "Clever, that is exactly why I chose you for this." 3 days earlier, none of this had seemed possible. Elena had married Kael, the Alpha King of the Northern Hollow Pack, 6 months before, in a ceremony arranged by 2 dying alliances trying to survive one more winter. She was not chosen because he loved her. She was chosen because her family controlled the eastern trade roads, and Kael needed those roads open if his people were going to eat through the cold season. Love had nothing to do with it. Duty had everything to do with it. Kael was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that always looked like he had just come from battle, even when he had only come from a meeting. His eyes were a deep amber, sharp and alert, the eyes of a man who trusted almost no one. He ruled with strength and control, and though his people respected him, few dared to get close to him, Elena included. In the beginning, she told herself she did not mind. She told herself a marriage built on duty could still be peaceful, even if it was not warm. She kept to her own chambers, attended council meetings when required, and spoke only when spoken to. Kael, for his part, barely looked her way. He was polite in public and distant in private. Some nights, weeks passed without them exchanging more than a dozen words. But somewhere in those quiet, lonely months, something inside Elena had shifted. She began to notice the way Kael rubbed his temple when the pressure of ruling became too heavy. She began to notice how he stayed awake long after the rest of the castle slept, pacing the halls like a man haunted by responsibilities he could never put down. She noticed the way his voice softened, just barely, when he spoke to the youngest members of his pack, the ones too small to defend themselves. She had not meant to fall for him. It happened slowly, the way frost creeps across a window pane, one quiet moment at a time, until one day she looked at him and felt something she had never expected to feel for a husband chosen for her by politics. She never told him. She was certain it would only embarrass them both. Then came the night everything changed. Elena could not sleep. The castle was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that made her skin prickle with unease. She rose from her bed and walked the halls, telling herself she only wanted air. But her feet carried her toward the west wing, where the king's private council chamber stood behind 2 heavy oak doors. She heard voices before she reached the doors, low, careful, speaking in the tone people use when they do not want to be heard. She recognized Draven's voice first. Then another voice she did not know, rough and unfamiliar, speaking with the accent of the southern territories, the ones that had once tried to invade the Hollow and failed. "The king trusts you completely," the unfamiliar voice said. "That trust will be his downfall." "He will not see it coming," Draven answered. "By the time he realizes what is happening, half his pack will already answer to us." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, straining to hear more. "And the wife?" the stranger asked. "What of her?" Draven laughed quietly. "She is nothing. A trade agreement wearing a crown. Kael barely speaks to her. She will not be a problem." Elena's hands trembled, but she did not move. She stayed frozen against that wall until the voices stopped and footsteps faded into another corridor. Only then did she allow herself to breathe again. She spent the rest of that night awake, staring at the ceiling of her chamber, turning the conversation over and over in her mind. Draven, the beta Kael trusted above all others, second only to the king himself in rank and power, was planning something with outsiders, something that would put half the kingdom under someone else's control, and Kael had no idea. The next morning, Elena requested an audience with her husband. It took 3 attempts before his steward finally allowed her into the throne room, and even then, Cale barely looked up from the maps spread across his table. "I need to speak with you," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It is urgent." Cale glanced at her, his amber eyes flicking briefly with something like curiosity, before returning to the maps. "Speak then." "Last night, I overheard Draven speaking with someone from the Southern Territories. They were planning something against you, against the pack. He said you trusted him too much, and that trust would be his downfall." For a moment, Cale said nothing. Then he set down the marker he had been holding and looked at her fully, his expression unreadable. "You overheard this?" "Yes." "In the West Wing? Near the private council chamber?" "Yes." "At what hour?" "Near midnight." Cale's jaw tightened, but not with alarm, with something closer to irritation. "Elena, Draven has served this pack since before I was born. He trained me. He has fought beside me more times than I can count. Do you understand what you are accusing him of?" "I am not accusing him of anything," Elena said, feeling her composure begin to slip. "I am telling you what I heard." "And what proof do you have?" "A voice in the dark? A conversation you cannot even confirm was truly his?" "I know his voice, Cale. I have heard it in council meetings for 6 months." Cale studied her for a long moment, and for one fragile second, Elena thought he might actually believe her. Then his expression closed off completely, like a door shutting. "I think," he said slowly, "that you are lonely in this castle, and perhaps you are looking for a way to matter. I understand that. This marriage has not been easy for either of us. But making accusations against my most loyal advisor is not the way to earn my attention." The words struck harder than she expected. Elena felt heat rise to her face, a mixture of humiliation and anger she had never let herself feel in his presence before. "I am not looking for your attention," she said quietly. "I am trying to protect you." "I do not need protecting," Cale said, turning back to his maps, "least of all from Draven." Elena stood there a moment longer, waiting for something, some sign that he might reconsider. When none came, she turned and walked out of the throne room, her spine straight, refusing to let him see how deeply his dismissal had cut her. That night, alone in her chamber, Elena allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to feel the sting of his words. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and made a decision that would change everything. If Cale would not listen to her warning, she would find proof he could not ignore. She began quietly, carefully, the way one learns to move through a house full of sleeping wolves. She befriended a young kitchen servant named Mira, who had grown close to one of Draven's personal guards. Through careful, casual conversation, Elena learned that Draven had been meeting with strangers from the Southern Territories for weeks, always at night, always in secret. She learned that Draven's guard had recently begun receiving gold coins stamped with a Southern crest, more money than a guard's salary would ever provide. She learned that shipments meant for the Hollow's eastern storehouses had been mysteriously rerouted twice in the last month, always with Draven's seal of approval. Piece by piece, the picture began to form, and it was worse than Elena had imagined. Draven was not simply plotting against Cale. He was slowly starving the kingdom's defenses, redirecting resources, and preparing the ground for an invasion that would come from within, before anyone from outside even had to lift a blade. Elena wrote everything down in a small leather journal she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her chamber. Names, dates, the rerouted shipments, the strange gold coins. She was building a case Cale could not dismiss as loneliness or imagination. But the more she learned, the more she understood the danger she was in. Draven was careful. If he discovered she was gathering evidence against him, he would not hesitate to remove her from his path entirely, and there would be no one to protect her, not even her own husband, who still believed his beta could do no wrong. 3 weeks into her secret investigation, Elena made a mistake. She had been following Mira's guard friend from a distance, trying to see where he went after his shift ended, when she turned a corner in the lower castle grounds and walked directly into Draven himself. His eyes moved over her with a slow, assessing look that made her stomach twist. "Lady Elena, this is an unusual place to find the king's wife. The lower grounds are not typically where noble ladies wander." "I was taking air," Elena said, keeping her voice light. "The gardens felt crowded tonight." Draven's smile did not reach his eyes. "Of course, though I find it curious. This is the third time this month I have seen you near the servant quarters at this hour. Elena's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression calm. I did not realize my movements were being tracked, Beta Draven. They are not, he said smoothly. I simply notice things. It is part of what makes me useful to the king. He paused, studying her a moment longer. You should be careful, Lady Elena. This castle has secrets even a queen should not go looking for. Some things are better left undiscovered. He walked past her without another word, but the warning in his voice lingered long after he disappeared into the shadows. Elena returned to her chamber shaking, her hands trembling as she locked the door behind her. Draven knew she was watching him. He might not know exactly what she had discovered, but he knew enough to be suspicious, and a suspicious enemy was far more dangerous than an unaware one. She sat on the edge of her bed and opened her leather journal, staring at the evidence she had gathered. It was not enough, not yet. She needed something undeniable, something that would force Cale to see the truth even through his loyalty to the man who had raised him like a mentor. That night, unable to sleep, Elena made her way to the castle's old library, a place few people visited anymore since most of the kingdom's records had been moved to newer archives. She had heard whispers among the older servants about forgotten texts hidden deep in the library's lowest shelves, texts that spoke of old magic long abandoned by the pack, magic considered too dangerous, too costly, to ever be used again. She was not looking for magic that night. She was only looking for old maps of the southern trade routes, hoping to trace exactly where Draven's rerouted shipments had gone. But as she searched through dusty shelves by candlelight, her fingers brushed against a thin, leather-bound book tucked behind a row of forgotten histories, a book that seemed to hum faintly beneath her touch, as though it were somehow alive. She almost left it where it was, almost. But something about the book's quiet pull made her pause, made her pull it free from its hiding place, and open its brittle pages under the flickering candlelight. The words inside were written in an old dialect, difficult to read, but not impossible. As Elena studied the pages, she realized this was no ordinary book of maps or history. It was a book of old bonds and old magic, the kind pack elders used centuries ago, before such practices were forbidden. And on one page, worn thin from age, was a spell Elena would think about every day for the rest of her life. A spell that could remove a single person from another person's memory entirely, erasing every trace of their existence from that one mind, while leaving the rest of the world untouched. She closed the book quickly, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with Draven. She told herself she would never need such a thing. She told herself she was only curious, only searching for information that might help her understand the old ways of her husband's people. But she slipped the book into the folds of her cloak before she left the library that night, and she did not examine too closely why. 2 nights later, everything came apart. Elena had arranged to meet Mira near the old training grounds, hoping to learn more about the guard's connection to Draven, when a hand closed around her arm from behind, pulling her into the shadows of an empty stable. She spun around, ready to fight, and found herself face to face with Draven himself, a blade already drawn, its edge catching the moonlight. I warned you, he said quietly, that some things are better left undiscovered. Before Elena could call for help, another man stepped out from the darkness behind Draven, the same man whose voice she had heard in the council chamber weeks ago. He moved quickly, pressing a second blade against her throat, while Draven stepped back, watching with cold calculation. You should not have come here alone, Draven said, but I suppose that is what makes you useful. No guards, no witnesses, just a foolish young wife who thinks she can save a kingdom that does not even want her. And there, with a blade pressed against her skin, and her own husband unaware she was even missing, Elena finally understood the price of the secret she had been carrying. She was not going to walk away from this stable easily. Whatever happened next, she would need to be smarter, faster, and braver than she had ever been in her life. Because Draven was not finished speaking, and something in his eyes told her the worst was still coming. You are going to help me, Draven said, circling her slowly, while the stranger kept his blade steady against her throat. You are going to write a letter to the king. In your own hand, in your own words, you will tell him you are leaving, that the marriage has become unbearable, that you are returning to your family's lands and will not come back. Elena's mind raced, even as fear tightened around her chest like a fist. He will not believe it. He will believe whatever a letter in your handwriting tells him, Draven said, especially after the argument you two had in the throne room. The whole castle heard how he dismissed you. Servants talk, Lady Elena. Everyone already believes your marriage is falling apart. This letter will simply confirm what they already suspect. And if I refuse? Draven's smile did not waver. Then my friend here will make sure you never write anything again. The blade at her throat pressed closer, just enough to make her breath catch. Elena forced herself to stay still, to think, instead of panic. She needed time. She needed a way out of this stable that did not end with her blood on the straw-covered floor. Why does it matter to you if I leave? She asked, stalling. You said yourself I am nothing. A trade agreement wearing a crown. Because a distracted king is a careless king, Draven said. Right now, Kael spends his nights pacing the halls, worrying about pack matters, worrying about the cold season, worrying about you, whether he admits it or not. Once you are gone, once he believes his wife abandoned him, his focus will shatter completely. Grief and humiliation make even strong men weak. That weakness is exactly what my allies in the south need to move against the Hollow without resistance. Elena's stomach turned as the full shape of the plan became clear. This was never only about redirected shipments or secret coins. Draven intended to hand the kingdom over to outsiders, and he was using her, using the fragile unspoken feelings she had never confessed, as the final piece of his plan.
Kael does not care about me,
she said, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue.
He made that very clear.
Perhaps, Draven said, but you care about him. I have watched you for months, Lady Elena. The way you look at him when he is not paying attention. The way you defend him even now, with a blade at your throat, still trying to protect his pride, instead of begging for your own life. He shook his head slowly. That kind of devotion is rare. It is also useful, because a king who believes his wife abandoned him out of unbearable unhappiness will not go looking for conspiracies. He will simply believe he failed as a husband, and men who believe they have failed do not think clearly. Elena understood then that arguing would not save her. She needed a different strategy entirely. Fine, she said quietly. I will write the letter. Draven's eyes narrowed slightly, surprised by how quickly she agreed. Good. That is a wise decision. He nodded to the stranger, who lowered his blade just enough to allow Elena to move her hands, though he kept close enough to stop her if she tried to run. Draven produced a small piece of parchment and a traveling inkpot from inside his cloak, pressing them into her trembling hands. Write exactly what I tell you, he said. Elena took the parchment, her mind working faster than her shaking hands could keep up with. She needed to write something that would satisfy Draven's demands on the surface, while somehow leaving a thread Kael might follow if he ever looked closely enough. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only chance she had. She began to write, her handwriting deliberately unsteady, as though grief had shaken her control. Draven dictated the words slowly, watching every letter she formed. She wrote of unbearable loneliness, of a marriage built on nothing but duty, of a heart that could no longer bear living in a castle where she was invisible. Each word cut deeper than the last, not because they were entirely false, but because they were close enough to true feelings she had never spoken aloud. But at the very end, when Draven instructed her to sign only her name, Elena added one small detail he did not notice. She dated the letter using the old calendar system her grandmother had taught her as a child, a system almost no one in the Hollow still used, except scholars and a small number of Elder Pack members. It was subtle, it was easy to overlook, but if Kael, or anyone loyal to him, ever thought to question the timing of her disappearance against the date written on the letter, the discrepancy might raise questions Draven could not easily answer. It was not much, but it was something. Draven took the finished letter, reading it over with satisfaction. Good, this will do perfectly. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his cloak. Now, Lady Elena, we come to the more difficult part of tonight's arrangement. You cannot simply return to the castle after writing this. A wife who claims to be leaving must actually disappear. Elena's blood ran cold. What do you intend to do with me? Nothing permanent, Draven said, though his tone offered no real comfort. You are still useful to me. Alive, you are a hidden card I may need to play again. Dead, you are only a body that raises questions. My allies in the south have a location, remote, well hidden, where you will remain until this matter with Kael is resolved. You mean to keep me prisoner? I mean to keep you contained, Draven corrected. Prisoner is such an unpleasant word. Elena's mind spun, searching desperately for any option that did not end with her locked away in some hidden southern outpost while her husband believed she had abandoned him, and Draven tightened his grip on the kingdom. She thought of Mira, waiting for her near the training grounds, likely already worried by how long Elena had been gone. She thought of the leather journal hidden beneath her floorboard, evidence that would mean nothing if she disappeared before anyone found it. And she thought, unexpectedly, of the strange old book tucked into the folds of her cloak, the one she had taken from the forgotten shelves of the castle library only 2 nights before. She did not fully understand why the thought of that book surfaced now, in the middle of the worst danger she had ever faced. But some instinct, some quiet certainty she could not explain, told her the answer to protecting Cale might not come from evidence or letters at all. There is something you should know, Elena said suddenly, forcing her voice to stay calm and even. If I disappear tonight without warning, Cale will not simply mourn and move on the way you expect. He will search. He is not a man who accepts loss quietly, whatever he shows in public. And when he searches, he will eventually find the same things I found. The rerouted shipments, the southern gold. The pattern will be there for anyone determined enough to look. Draven's expression flickered, just slightly, the first genuine crack of uncertainty Elena had seen from him all night. You are bluffing. Am I? Elena held his gaze steadily, refusing to let her fear show through. I found it. A grieving husband with nothing left to lose might find it too. For a long moment, Draven said nothing, weighing her words with the same cold calculation he weighed everything. Then he stepped closer, his voice dropping low. Then perhaps the letter is not enough after all. Perhaps something more permanent is required, something that ensures Cale never thinks to search for reasons behind your absence at all. Elena's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. She did not know what Draven meant by those words, but she understood, with growing dread, that she had just made herself far more dangerous to him than she had been only moments before. The stranger holding the blade shifted his stance, waiting for Draven's next order. Elena's eyes darted around the stable, searching for anything, a loose tool, an open door, a moment of distraction, that might give her a chance to run. She found nothing immediate, but she refused to let despair take hold. Somewhere in this castle, Mira was waiting, and eventually someone would notice she had not returned. She only needed to survive long enough for that to matter. There is a simpler way, Draven said finally, his voice thoughtful now, almost curious. You mentioned old texts, old pack knowledge. Tell me, Lady Elena, in your search through the castle's forgotten shelves, did you come across the ancient bonding rites? The old magic our ancestors used before the elders forbid its practice? Elena's breath caught. She said nothing, but her silence answered for her. Draven's eyes lit with something dangerously close to delight. You did. I can see it on your face. He studied her a moment longer, then laughed softly, a low, humorless sound. How fitting. Perhaps there is a better solution here than a letter and a hidden outpost after all. What are you talking about? Elena demanded, though a cold, sinking feeling had already begun to spread through her chest. The old texts speak of many things, Draven said. Bonds, memory, the threads that connect one mind to another, and the ways those threads can be cut. He tilted his head, studying her with new interest. If Cale's grief over your disappearance is the danger, why not remove the grief entirely? Why not ensure he never remembers you existed at all? That is not possible, Elena whispered, though even as she said it, she thought of the spell she had read only nights before, the one she had told herself she would never need. It is possible, Draven said. Difficult, costly, and forbidden for good reason, but possible, and it would solve every problem standing before me tonight. No grieving king searching for missing shipments, no letter that might raise suspicion, only a king who never knew he had a wife to lose in the first place. Elena's mind raced, horror and calculation tangling together as she realized the danger she now faced was far greater than a hidden prison in the south. Draven intended to force this magic upon her, to strip her from Cale's memory against her will, using knowledge he did not fully understand, and power he had no right to wield. She could not let that happen. Not like this. Not controlled by Draven's hands, twisted into a weapon against the very man she had been trying to protect. You do not know how to perform such a rite, Elena said quickly, grasping for any advantage. These spells require precision. A single mistake could kill the caster, or worse, corrupt the bond entirely, leaving Kale's mind damaged beyond repair. Is that truly the risk you wish to take with the king's sanity, when madness in a ruler brings exactly the kind of chaos your southern allies would need to seize control? For the first time that night, real doubt flickered across Draven's face. He was ambitious, but he was not foolish, and the thought of an unstable, unpredictable king ruling in Kale's place, one who might lash out violently against everyone around him, including Draven's own southern allies, clearly gave him pause. You claim to understand this magic better than I do, he said slowly. I have studied it, Elena said, which was not entirely a lie. Enough to know it should never be attempted carelessly, and never by force. Draven studied her for a long, tense moment, the stable silent, except for the soft shifting of horses in nearby stalls. Then he stepped back, sheathing the blade he had drawn earlier, though the stranger beside Elena kept his weapon steady. Then perhaps, Draven said, you will perform it yourself. Elena's stomach dropped. What? You clearly understand the magic better than any of us. You clearly care enough about protecting Kale to risk your own safety gathering evidence against me. So prove it. Remove yourself from his memory, willingly, precisely, without the risk of corrupting his mind that concerns you so deeply. Do this, and I will let you live. I will let you walk away from the Hollow entirely, free to build whatever life you wish elsewhere, far from this kingdom and its politics. And if I refuse? Draven's expression hardened again, the brief crack of doubt sealing shut. Then my friend here ensures you never leave this stable at all, and I find someone less careful to attempt the right on my terms instead, with far greater risk to Kale's mind than you seem willing to accept. Elena stood frozen, the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on her chest. Every option before her led to loss, refuse, and she might die tonight, with Draven free to pursue his plans through more dangerous, more reckless means. Agree, and she would erase herself from the memory of the only person she had ever truly loved, disappearing from his life as though she had never existed at all, while he remained completely unaware of the sacrifice being made to protect him. She thought of Kale pacing the halls at night, carrying burdens he never let anyone see. She thought of the softness in his voice when he spoke to the youngest members of his pack. She thought of every quiet moment she had witnessed and treasured, moments he did not even know she had noticed. If she disappeared tonight through force or violence, Draven would simply adjust his plans and continue his slow poison against the kingdom, using some other reckless method to achieve the same devastating end. But if she did this willingly, on her own terms, using the knowledge she had already gathered, she might be able to control the outcome in ways Draven could never predict. She might be able to protect Kale in a way that gave her some small measure of power over her own sacrifice, rather than leaving it entirely in the hands of the man scheming to destroy everything Kale had built. I will need 3 days, Elena said finally, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. The right cannot be rushed. If you want this done correctly, without risk to Kale's mind, you will give me the time it requires. Draven considered this, weighing her words carefully. 2 days, he said finally, and you will not attempt to warn him, or gather more evidence against me, or do anything foolish in that time. If I sense even a hint of betrayal, I will end this the way I originally intended, and there will be no mercy for you or anyone who helped you. Elena nodded, forcing herself to appear defeated, though inside her mind was already working, already planning every step of what she would need to do in the 2 days Draven had given her. 2 days, she agreed quietly. Draven smiled, satisfied, and gestured for the stranger to release her. Elena stumbled slightly, as the blade left her throat, her legs weak with the aftermath of fear she had been holding back, through sheer will alone. Do not disappoint me, Lady Elena, Draven said as she turned to leave the stable. The fate of this kingdom, and your own life, now rests entirely in your hands. Elena walked away from that stable with her heart pounding, and her mind racing through everything she would need to accomplish before those 2 days ran out. She had bought herself time, but time alone would not be enough. She needed a plan that protected Kale from Draven's schemes, protected the evidence she had already gathered, and somehow found a way to make her sacrifice mean something, rather than simply handing Draven the victory he believed he had already won. Somewhere in the castle, Mira was still waiting for her, unaware of everything that had just happened in the shadows of that stable. Somewhere in the castle, Kale was likely still awake, pacing the halls, burdened by responsibilities he never let anyone share. And somewhere in the folds of Elena's cloak, the old leather book still hummed faintly against her skin, waiting for her to decide exactly what kind of sacrifice she was truly willing to make. Elena did not return to her own chamber that night. Instead, she found Mira, waiting anxiously near the training grounds, exactly where they had agreed to meet, hours before, pacing back and forth, with a worried expression that deepened the moment she saw Elena's face. "You are hurt," Mira said, rushing forward, her eyes catching the faint red mark still visible at Elena's throat. "What happened? You have been gone for hours." "I do not have much time to explain," Elena said, pulling Mira gently into the shadow of a nearby wall, away from any wandering eyes. "I need your help, and I need you to trust me completely, even if what I ask does not make sense right away." Mira nodded without hesitation. In the weeks they had spent together, gathering quiet pieces of evidence against Draven, an unlikely friendship had formed between them, built on shared danger and shared purpose. "Whatever you need." "There is a floorboard beneath the third window in my chamber, on the left side, near the fireplace. Inside, you will find a leather journal. Everything I have discovered about Draven is written there. Names, dates, the rerouted shipments, all of it." Elena gripped Mira's hands tightly. "If anything happens to me in the next 2 days, you must find a way to get that journal into Kale's hands. Not to Draven, not to anyone in the council who might be loyal to him, only to Kale. Directly, and only when you are certain he is alone." Mira's eyes widened with alarm. "What do you mean, if anything happens to you?" "Elena, what happened tonight?" Elena hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. The truth was so strange, so impossible sounding, that she worried Mira might not believe her, or worse, might try to intervene in ways that would only put them both in greater danger. "Draven knows I have been investigating him," she said finally. "He caught me tonight. I convinced him to give me 2 days before he decides my fate, but I do not know what those 2 days will bring. I need you to be ready, in case things do not go the way I hope." "We should go to the king now," Mira urged. "Tonight, while there is still time, tell him everything. Show him the journal yourself." Elena shook her head. "Kale already dismissed my warning once. He will not believe words alone. Especially not tonight, exhausted and confused, without proof, laid out clearly before him. If I go to him now, in this state, Draven will simply deny everything and claim I am unstable, grieving, imagining conspiracies where none exist. I need the journal to speak for itself, at the right moment, when Kale has no choice but to see the truth." Mira studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between her instinct to act immediately and her trust in Elena's judgment. Finally, she nodded slowly. "I will keep the journal safe. I will find a way to reach the king if something happens to you. But Elena, please, be careful. Whatever you are planning, do not do something reckless." Elena managed a small, tired smile, though the weight of what she was about to attempt pressed heavily on her chest. "I will do what I must to protect this kingdom, and the king within it. That is all I can promise." She embraced Mira briefly, a rare gesture of genuine affection between two women who had grown far closer than either expected during their secret investigation, and then she made her way back toward her own chamber, moving quickly and quietly through the sleeping castle. Once inside, with the door locked securely behind her, Elena finally allowed herself a moment to breathe, to process everything that had happened in the stable, and everything she now needed to accomplish in the 2 days Draven had given her. She retrieved the old leather book from the folds of her cloak and placed it carefully on the small writing desk near her window, studying its worn cover under the soft light of a single candle. The spell inside had seemed like nothing more than curious, forbidden history when she first found it. Now it felt like the only path forward, the only way to protect Kale from a danger he refused to believe existed. She spent the remainder of that night reading through the spell's instructions carefully, translating the old dialect as best she could, cross-referencing unfamiliar words with other texts scattered throughout the library's forgotten shelves, during a second, more careful visit before dawn. The spell was complex, requiring specific herbs, a particular phase of the moon, and a willingness from the caster to offer something of deep, personal value as the price of the magic. The book was clear on one point above all others. This was not a spell that could be forced upon someone against their will, not truly, not without severe risk of corrupting the bond entirely. Exactly as Elena had warned Draven in the stable, the magic required the willing sacrifice of the person being erased, a conscious choice made with full understanding of the cost. If performed correctly by Elena herself, targeting her own existence within Kael's memory, the spell would work cleanly, precisely, exactly as she intended. If Draven attempted to force such magic through violence or coercion against someone unwilling, the results could be catastrophic, unpredictable, potentially damaging Kael's mind in ways no one could control. This was, Elena realized, both her burden and her only real leverage. Draven needed her willing participation if he wanted this done safely. That gave her a narrow window of control over how, exactly, this sacrifice would unfold. By the time morning light began creeping through her chamber window, Elena had made her decision. She would perform the spell, but not exactly as Draven expected. The old text spoke of the bond between two people as a thread, delicate and precise, connecting specific memories, specific recognitions, specific emotional attachments between one mind and another. Removing herself from Kael's memory meant severing every thread that connected her existence to his awareness, every memory of her face, her voice, their wedding day, every quiet moment they had shared, however small or insignificant it might have seemed at the time. But the text also mentioned something else, buried deep within a passage Elena had almost overlooked during her first reading. True bonds, the ones built on genuine emotional connection rather than simple recognition or memory, were far more resistant to this kind of magic than the book's simpler passages suggested. Feelings developed over shared experience, over trust slowly built despite difficult circumstances, could leave faint impressions behind, even after the specific memories themselves were erased. Echoes, the text called them. Fragments of feeling without clear explanation, capable of surfacing under the right emotional pressure, even long after the spell had been completed. Elena did not know if what she felt for Kael, and what she suspected, despite his denials, he might have begun to feel for her in return, qualified as the kind of true bond the text described. But it gave her a small, fragile hope to hold on to as she prepared for what she was about to do. Even if she disappeared from his memory entirely, some part of the connection between them might remain, buried deep beneath the surface of his conscious mind, waiting for the right moment to resurface. She spent that first full day gathering the specific herbs the spell required, moving carefully through the castle's gardens and the small apothecary shop in the lower town, careful never to draw suspicion or reveal exactly what she was preparing. She purchased small quantities from several different vendors, spreading her purchases across the day so no single merchant would notice the unusual combination she was collecting. She also spent time, whenever she could manage it without arousing Draven's suspicion, watching Kael from a careful distance. She told herself it was simply preparation, a way to fix every detail of him firmly in her own memory before she erased herself from his. But the truth was simpler and more painful than that. She wanted these final glimpses of him, these last quiet moments of watching him move through his responsibilities, with the same tired determination she had come to love, before that love became something only she would remember. She watched him review reports with his council, his brow furrowed in concentration. She watched him train briefly with younger pack members in the courtyard, correcting their stances with patient, careful instruction, despite the weight of everything else demanding his attention. She watched him pause once, near the edge of the training grounds, staring off toward the horizon with an expression she could not quite read, something between exhaustion and longing, though she had no way of knowing what, or who, occupied his thoughts in that moment. She almost approached him then. She almost walked across that courtyard and told him everything, the conspiracy, the letter, the impossible choice Draven had forced upon her. But she remembered his dismissal in the throne room, the closed-off expression on his face when he suggested she was simply lonely and seeking attention, and her courage faltered. If she approached him now, without proof stronger than her word alone, Draven would find some way to twist the situation to his advantage, before Kael ever had the chance to truly understand the danger surrounding them both. She turned away from the courtyard instead, carrying the memory of that unreadable expression on his face back to her chamber, where it would join every other fragment of him she was quietly, desperately trying to preserve. That evening, as the first day drew to a close, Elena received an unexpected visit. A soft knock sounded at her chamber door, and when she opened it, she found Draven standing in the corridor, his expression carefully neutral, though something calculating lingered behind his eyes. "I wanted to check on your progress," he said, stepping inside, without waiting for an invitation, his gaze sweeping briefly across the small collection of herbs Elena had left, drying near her window. "You have been busy." "The spell requires precise preparation," Elena said, keeping her voice steady, despite the sudden tension tightening her shoulders. "I told you it could not be rushed." Draven studied the herbs a moment longer, then turned his attention back to her. "I trust you understand the consequences if this does not proceed exactly as promised." "I understand perfectly," Elena said. "You have made your expectations very clear." "Good." Draven moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back at her with an expression that almost looked like curiosity. "May I ask you something, Lady Elena? Something outside the arrangement between us?" Elena tensed, but nodded carefully. "You may ask. Why does this matter so much to you? Cale dismissed your warning without hesitation. He humiliated you in front of his own council. Any reasonable person in your position would feel little loyalty toward a husband who treats them with such indifference. Yet here you are, willing to erase yourself entirely, rather than let harm come to him, or to this kingdom he rules." Draven tilted his head slightly. "What exactly do you owe him?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering, aware that whatever she said might reveal more than she intended. "I do not owe him anything," she said finally. "This is not about debt or obligation, or even about him specifically. This kingdom is full of people who have nothing to do with the argument between Cale and myself. Servants, farmers, children too young to understand politics or power. If your southern allies succeed, all of them suffer the consequences, regardless of whatever grievance exists between me and my husband." It was not the complete truth, but it was not entirely a lie either. Elena did care about the kingdom beyond her feelings for Cale, genuinely and deeply. But the deeper truth, the one she kept carefully hidden even from herself in Draven's presence, remained unspoken. Draven studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his expression, before he finally nodded and moved toward the door once more. "A noble answer," he said, though his tone suggested he was not entirely convinced. "One day remains, Lady Elena. Do not disappoint me." He left without another word, and Elena sank into the chair near her writing desk the moment the door closed behind him, exhaling a breath she had not realized she was holding. She spent that final night before the spell, reviewing every instruction one final time, ensuring she understood exactly how to perform the ritual correctly, exactly what price the magic would require of her, and exactly what she hoped, desperately, might remain of the connection between herself and Cale, even after the spell was complete. The old text was clear about the personal cost involved. Removing herself from someone else's memory required more than simply reciting words or burning herbs at the correct moment. It required a genuine, willing sacrifice from the caster, a piece of themselves offered freely as payment for the magic's power. For most who had attempted such spells throughout history, according to the fragmented accounts scattered through the book's later pages, that sacrifice had taken the form of specific memories belonging to the caster themselves, moments they treasured deeply enough that losing them created a genuine sense of loss, capable of fueling the spell's power. Elena understood, with a heavy, aching certainty, exactly what memories she would need to offer. Every quiet moment she had spent watching Cale from a careful distance, every small kindness she had witnessed him show to those weaker than himself, every fragile, unspoken hope she had allowed herself to feel during 6 months of a marriage built on nothing but duty. If the spell required a genuine sacrifice to succeed, she would need to give up her own memories of loving him, alongside erasing herself from his awareness entirely. It seemed almost unbearably cruel, that protecting him meant losing not only his memory of her, but her own memory of every reason she had come to care for him in the first place. But cruelty, Elena had learned over the past several days, was simply the price certain kinds of love demanded, and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was still willing to pay it. As the candle in her chamber burned low that final night, Elena allowed herself one small indulgence before beginning the difficult work of preparing herself for what tomorrow would bring. She took out a small piece of parchment, different from the letter Draven had forced her to write in the stable, and began writing a message meant only for herself, a message she would hide carefully, alongside the leather journal Mira now safeguarded, in case some fragment of her memory survived the spell in ways the old text could not fully predict. She wrote of Cale's tired eyes and quiet strength. She wrote of the softness in his voice when he spoke to children too young to understand the weight he carried. She wrote of every reason she had fallen for a husband chosen for her by politics rather than choice, preserving those feelings on parchment, even as she prepared to lose them from her own mind entirely. When she finished, she folded the parchment carefully and sealed it with wax, writing only 3 words across the front. For my heart, whoever reads this next, whether it was her own future self somehow recovering fragments of forgotten feeling, or someone else entirely, would understand exactly what these pages meant to preserve. She hid the sealed parchment inside the lining of an old traveling cloak stored at the bottom of her wardrobe, a place unlikely to draw attention from Draven or anyone else searching her chamber. And then she finally allowed herself to sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring the most difficult night of her life. The next day passed in a blur of final preparations. Elena gathered the last remaining herbs, confirmed the timing of the moon's phase against the old text requirements, and steeled herself for what needed to happen once darkness fell completely. As evening approached, she made one final decision, small but significant. She would not perform the spell inside her own chamber, where Draven might interrupt or observe more closely than she wished. Instead, she requested access to the castle's old ritual chamber, a room barely used anymore except during formal pact ceremonies, claiming she needed privacy and proper space for the working Draven had demanded. Draven agreed without much argument, likely eager to see the arrangement finally completed, and arranged for her to have the chamber to herself for several hours that night, with only the stranger from the stable positioned outside the door to ensure she did not attempt to flee or seek help. As Elena entered the ritual chamber that evening, carrying the old leather book and the carefully gathered herbs, she paused at the threshold for one final moment, allowing herself to feel the full weight of what she was about to do. Somewhere in the castle, Cale was likely reviewing reports or pacing quiet corridors, entirely unaware that his wife was preparing to erase herself from his memory to protect him from a danger he refused to believe existed. Somewhere, Mira waited nervously, with a hidden journal, ready to act if Elena's plan somehow failed. And here, alone in this ancient chamber, Elena stood at the edge of the most significant sacrifice of her life, uncertain exactly what would remain of her once the spell was complete, but certain, absolutely certain, that she was making the right choice. She stepped fully into the chamber, closed the heavy door behind her, and began preparing the space exactly as the old text instructed, unaware that the choice she was about to make would set into motion consequences far beyond anything she or Draven could have predicted. The ritual chamber was colder than Elena expected, its stone walls holding no warmth despite the small brazier she had lit near its center. She arranged the herbs exactly as the old text instructed, forming a careful circle around a single unlit candle, and knelt before it, opening the leather book to the page she had memorized so thoroughly over the past 2 days that she barely needed to read the words anymore. Her hands trembled as she lit the candle at the circle's center, watching the small flame flicker and steady in the still air of the chamber. According to the text, the spell would require her to speak Cale's name aloud, to hold every memory of him clearly in her mind, and then to release those memories one by one into the flame, watching them transform from cherished moments into nothing more than smoke and ash. She closed her eyes and began. "Cale," she whispered, and the candle flame flickered in response, as though the chamber itself recognized the weight of the name being spoken. Cale, Alpha King of the Northern Hollow. She thought first of their wedding day, the formal ceremony conducted with careful precision by pack elders, Cale's expression unreadable, as he recited vows neither of them had chosen freely. She had stood beside him that day, terrified and hopeful in equal measure, wondering what kind of life awaited her beside a man she barely knew. She held that memory clearly in her mind, felt its weight and texture one final time, and then, with a deep, steadying breath, released it toward the flame. The candle flickered violently, and Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a small, sharp pain, as though a thread connecting her to that specific memory had been cut cleanly away. When the flame steadied again, she found she could still remember the wedding day intellectually, could still recall the facts of what had happened, but the emotional weight of it, the fear and hope she had felt standing beside him, had grown distant and faded, like a story she had read about someone else, rather than something she had lived herself. She continued, memory by memory, releasing each one into the flame. She thought of the quiet evenings when Cale paced the halls long after the castle slept, burdened by responsibilities he never let anyone share, and she released the tenderness she had felt watching him from a careful distance, wishing she had the courage to offer comfort he likely would have refused. She thought of the softness in his voice when he spoke to the youngest members of his pack, patient and gentle despite the weight of everything else demanding his attention, and she released the warmth that memory had always brought her, the quiet certainty that beneath his cold, distant exterior existed a man capable of genuine kindness. She thought of every small moment scattered across 6 months of a difficult, dutiful marriage, every glance exchanged across a crowded council chamber, every rare instance when his guarded expression softened just slightly in her presence, and she released each one carefully, deliberately, watching the candle flame respond with the same violent flicker each time, feeling the same sharp, cutting pain deep in her chest. By the time she reached the memory of overhearing Draven's conspiracy in the West Wing corridor, the memory that had started this entire desperate chain of events, Elena's hands were shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming freely down her face despite her efforts to remain composed. This memory felt different from the others, more recent, more urgent, still tangled up with fear and determination, rather than the softer emotions attached to her earlier memories of Cale. She hesitated before releasing it, uncertain whether the spell required this memory to be removed as well, since it did not directly involve affection or attachment in the way her other memories did. But the old text was clear on this point. The spell removed her entirely from Cale's memory. Every interaction, every moment of overlap between their lives, regardless of the emotional weight attached. If she wanted this to work correctly, completely, she needed to release everything, including the very discovery that had led her to this chamber in the first place. She released it, and the pain that followed was sharper than anything before it, as though her mind understood, even through the haze of ritual and sacrifice, exactly how significant this particular memory truly was. Hours passed as Elena worked her way through every memory she held of her husband, every moment of their 6-month marriage, every quiet observation and unspoken hope she had carried since the day they first met. The candle flame flickered and steadied, over and over, until finally, exhausted and trembling, Elena reached the final page of instructions in the old leather book. The text spoke of a final step, one she had read carefully but had not fully understood until this moment, kneeling in the cold ritual chamber, with tears drying on her face, and her chest aching from the weight of everything she had already sacrificed. The spell required one last offering, a physical token representing the connection being severed, something that would be destroyed alongside the final memory, sealing the magic completely, and ensuring it could never be accidentally reversed. Elena reached beneath the collar of her dress and withdrew a small pendant she had worn since her wedding day. A simple silver piece, shaped like a wolf's paw, traditional among the Hollow Pack as a symbol of belonging and protection. Cale had given it to her himself during their wedding ceremony, the only personal gesture he had offered throughout the entire formal proceeding, pressing it into her palm with a brief, unreadable look before the ceremony continued. She had treasured that pendant more than she ever admitted to anyone, wearing it hidden beneath her clothing every single day since their wedding, a small, private reminder of the one moment during their entire ceremony that had felt genuinely personal rather than purely political. Her hands trembled as she held the pendant above the candle flame, understanding fully now what its destruction would mean. This was not simply about erasing herself from Cale's memory. This was about severing every physical, emotional, and symbolic connection between them, ensuring nothing remained that might accidentally trigger recognition or memory in the future. She hesitated, the pendant swinging gently on its thin silver chain, catching the candlelight in a way that made it seem to glow softly against the darkness of the chamber. Then, with a final steadying breath, she released it into the flame. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The candle flame roared upward suddenly, far brighter and larger than any ordinary flame should burn, casting wild shadows across the ritual chamber's stone walls. Elena felt something powerful and disorienting wash over her entire body, a sensation like falling and floating simultaneously, as though the very fabric connecting her existence to Cale's awareness was being violently torn apart. She cried out, though whether in pain or simply overwhelming sensation, she could not have said, and then, just as suddenly as it began, the flame settled back down to its normal size, flickering gently, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Elena knelt in the sudden quiet that followed, breathing heavily, her entire body trembling with exhaustion and the aftermath of whatever magic had just moved through her. The pendant was gone, completely consumed by the flame, leaving no trace behind, except a faint, lingering warmth in the air of the chamber. She waited, uncertain what she expected to feel, uncertain whether the spell had actually worked, or whether she had simply exhausted herself through an elaborate ritual that accomplished nothing beyond emotional devastation. She tried to think of Cale, testing whether her own memories remained intact, despite everything she had just released into that candle flame. To her relief and quiet devastation both, she found she could still remember him clearly, still recall every detail of his appearance and personality, still hold the facts of their marriage firmly in her mind. The old text had warned her this would happen. The spell removed her from his memory, not his existence from hers. She would remember everything about their time together, every sacrifice she had just made, every reason she had come to love him, while he, somewhere else in the castle, would simply forget she had ever existed at all. It was, Elena realized as she knelt exhausted in that quiet chamber, perhaps the cruelest part of the entire sacrifice. She would carry the full weight of this loss alone, remembering everything, while Cale remembered nothing, unable to ever explain or share the burden she had chosen to bear for his protection. A soft knock sounded at the chamber door, startling her from her exhausted thoughts. "Lady Elena," came the stranger's rough voice from outside. "Beta Draven wishes to know if the working is complete." Elena forced herself to stand, gathering the remaining herbs and the now empty leather book with trembling hands. "It is complete," she called back, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tell him it is done." She spent several more minutes composing herself before finally opening the chamber door, finding the stranger waiting exactly as expected, his expression unreadable in the dim corridor light. "Beta Draven requests your presence immediately," he said. "He wishes to confirm the working succeeded before honoring his part of the arrangement." Elena nodded wearily and followed him through the quiet castle corridors, her mind still reeling from everything she had just sacrificed, uncertain exactly what confirmation Draven expected, or how he intended to test whether the spell had truly worked. They found him waiting in a small antechamber near the castle's private quarters, his expression carefully neutral as Elena entered, though something calculating lingered behind his eyes as he studied her exhausted, tear-stained face. "It is done then," he said, more statement than question. "Yes," Elena confirmed quietly. "As I promised." Draven studied her a moment longer before nodding slowly. "We will know for certain soon enough. Cale retires to his chambers within the hour. If the spell worked as intended, he should show no recognition of you whatsoever come morning." Elena's stomach twisted painfully at the thought of facing Cale, of watching him look at her with complete unfamiliarity, but she forced herself to remain composed. "And our arrangement? I performed exactly what you demanded." "You will be escorted from the castle grounds before dawn," Draven confirmed. "A small party will accompany you, to ensure you leave quietly, without drawing attention or raising questions among the staff. Beyond that, you are free to build whatever life you wish, far from the Hollow and its politics." It was, Elena understood, exactly the outcome she had feared and expected from the beginning. She would disappear entirely, not only from Cale's memory, but from the kingdom itself, unable to witness whatever came next, unable to continue protecting him from whatever danger Draven still intended to unleash upon the pack she had grown to genuinely care about during her 6 months as its reluctant queen. But Elena had not spent the last 2 days simply preparing the spell itself. She had also spent considerable time thinking carefully about what would happen after, about how she might continue protecting Cale and the kingdom even after her official banishment, working from the shadows in ways Draven would never expect from a woman he believed had been thoroughly defeated. "I have one request," she said, keeping her voice carefully steady. "Before I leave." Draven raised an eyebrow. clearly not expecting further demands from someone in her position. And what would that be? I wish to see him one final time, Elena said. From a distance, unseen. Before I go, I know he will not recognize me. I only wish to see him safely, before I disappear from this kingdom entirely. For a long moment, Draven studied her carefully, weighing the request against whatever suspicions still lingered from their earlier conversation about her motives. Finally, he nodded, though his expression remained guarded. One final look, from a distance, and then you leave immediately afterward. Do not attempt anything foolish. I understand, Elena said quietly, though inside, her mind was already working, already planning exactly how she intended to use this final glimpse of her husband, before beginning whatever came next in her carefully forming plan to protect him, even from the shadows of a kingdom that no longer remembered her existence at all. Draven allowed her exactly 1 hour before dawn, and he did not allow her to move through the castle unwatched. The stranger from the stable trailed a careful distance behind her, as she made her way toward the private courtyard outside Cale's study, the one place she knew he sometimes stood alone in the earliest hours of morning, before the demands of the day fully claimed him. She found him there, exactly as she hoped, standing near the low stone wall that overlooked the eastern hills, his arms folded, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the first pale light of morning was beginning to touch the sky. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying too much for too long, and Elena felt an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the spell she had performed only hours before. She stayed at the courtyard's edge, hidden partially behind a column, watching him in silence. She did not approach. She did not speak. She simply allowed herself this final, quiet moment of witnessing the man she loved, knowing he no longer carried any memory of her within him. And yet, as she watched, something strange happened. Cale's brow furrowed slightly, and he turned, almost as though sensing her presence, his amber eyes scanning the courtyard with a puzzled expression. His gaze passed over the column where she stood hidden, and for one brief, impossible moment, Elena thought she saw something flicker behind his eyes, a faint confusion, as though some part of him recognized that something was missing without understanding what. Then he shook his head slightly, as if dismissing an odd feeling, and turned back toward the horizon. Elena's heart pounded. The old text had mentioned echoes, fragments of feeling capable of surfacing without explanation, even after specific memories had been erased completely. What she had just witnessed, that brief, unexplainable flicker of confusion, might have been exactly that, a small sign that despite everything she had sacrificed, some faint trace of the bond between them still remained, buried deep beneath the surface of his conscious awareness. It was not much, but it was something, and Elena carried that small, fragile hope with her, as the stranger stepped forward to escort her away from the courtyard, back toward the castle's lower gate, where a small party waited to accompany her banishment from the only home she had known for the past 6 months. As dawn broke fully over the hollow, Elena passed through the castle gates for what she believed, in that moment, might be the very last time, carrying nothing with her except a small bag of essential belongings, the empty leather book she had used to perform the spell, and a quiet, determined resolve to continue protecting Cale and his kingdom, even from beyond its borders. What Draven did not know, what he could not have anticipated, given how thoroughly he believed he had controlled every aspect of this arrangement, was that Elena had spent her final hours in the castle, doing far more than simply preparing herself emotionally for the spell she was about to perform. During her supposed preparation time, moving between the gardens and the lower town apothecary shop gathering herbs, Elena had also made contact with several individuals she trusted, carefully and quietly, laying the groundwork for a plan that would continue unfolding long after she disappeared from the kingdom entirely. She had spoken with an elderly pack scholar named Old Garrick, who maintained close ties to several eastern border settlements, and had long harbored his own quiet suspicions about Draven's growing influence within the council. She had shared enough carefully chosen details to earn his trust and cooperation, without revealing the full scope of her own involvement or the spell she intended to perform. She had also arranged, through Mira, a means of continued communication, even after her banishment, a small network of trusted servants and lower town merchants who could pass messages along hidden routes without drawing Draven's attention. It was a fragile system, built quickly under enormous pressure, but it was something, a lifeline connecting her to the kingdom she was being forced to leave. As the small escort party led her along the eastern road, away from the hollow's walls and into the surrounding wilderness, Elena allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything she had lost. Her memories of loving Kale, though the facts remained, felt distant now, like echoes of someone else's life rather than her own genuine feelings. Her position as queen, however uncomfortable and dutiful it had often felt, was gone entirely. Her home, the only stability she had known during 6 turbulent months of political marriage, had been stripped away in a single devastating night. But beneath the grief, something else remained, something Elena clung to with fierce determination as the wilderness closed in around the small traveling party. Purpose. She had not simply erased herself from Kale's memory and walked away. She had built the beginnings of a plan, fragile and incomplete, but real, that could still protect him and his kingdom from the danger Draven represented, even without her physical presence within the castle walls. The journey away from the Hollow took 3 full days, moving steadily eastward through increasingly rugged terrain, the small escort party growing more relaxed with each passing mile as they moved further from any settlement that might recognize Elena or question her sudden, unexplained departure from the kingdom she had briefly ruled alongside her husband. On the 3rd night, as the party made camp near a small, isolated stream, Elena finally saw her opportunity. The escort consisted of only 3 men, all loyal to Draven, though none of them particularly skilled or alert compared to the more experienced warriors typically found within Kale's personal guard. They had grown careless over the 3 days of uneventful travel, assuming Elena posed no real threat or risk of escape. A young, grieving noblewoman with nowhere else to go and no resources to resist their control. Elena had spent those 3 days carefully observing their routines, their watch rotations, the moments when their attention wandered furthest from their supposed prisoner. She had also, during a brief stop at a small trading post along the eastern road, managed to slip away just long enough to purchase a few essential supplies, using coins she had hidden carefully within the lining of her traveling cloak, coins she had saved quietly over her 6 months as queen, anticipating, perhaps unconsciously, that she might one day need resources beyond what anyone else provided her. As the 3rd night deepened and the escort settled into their watch rotation, Elena waited patiently near the edge of their small camp, feigning exhaustion and quiet resignation, while carefully tracking every movement of the men supposedly guarding her. When the moment finally came, the middle of the night watch, with 2 of the 3 men asleep and the 3rd distracted by tending the dying campfire, Elena moved quickly and quietly, slipping away from the camp's edge and disappearing into the surrounding darkness of the eastern wilderness. She did not run blindly. She had studied the terrain carefully during their 3 days of travel, noting landmarks and general directions that might lead her toward the border settlements where old Garrick maintained his connections. She moved steadily through the night, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the escort party before her absence was discovered. By the time morning light revealed her disappearance to the frustrated, panicked escort, Elena was already miles away, moving through dense forest terrain that would make tracking her extremely difficult for men unfamiliar with the region's more subtle paths and hidden trails. She traveled alone for 2 more days, surviving on the meager supplies she had managed to purchase and whatever she could forage from the surrounding wilderness, before finally reaching the outer edge of a small eastern settlement where old Garrick had once mentioned maintaining a trusted contact. The settlement, a modest collection of farms and small trading posts known as Millbrook, sat at the edge of the Hollow's eastern territory, close enough to remain under nominal pack protection, but far enough removed from the castle's immediate influence that Draven's reach felt considerably weaker here than within the capital itself. Elena found Garrick's contact, an older woman named Leora who ran the settlement's small apothecary shop, and after carefully explaining enough of her situation to earn trust without revealing everything, she found herself with a temporary place to stay and a small measure of safety from which to begin the next phase of her carefully forming plan. She spent her first days in Millbrook recovering from the physical exhaustion of her journey and the emotional devastation of everything she had sacrificed within the castle walls. But even as she rested, her mind remained sharp and focused, turning over every piece of information she had gathered during her investigation of Draven, every connection she had built during her final hours within the Hollow's castle, searching for the best way forward. She could not simply return to the castle and reveal everything to Kale directly, not without risking immediate exposure to Draven's network of informants and allies, who likely remained watchful for any sign of her survival or continued interference. But she also could not simply disappear entirely, abandoning the kingdom to whatever fate Draven intended to unleash upon it. Instead, working carefully through the network of trusted contacts she had begun building even before leaving the castle, Elena decided to become something else entirely. Not the queen who had been erased from her husband's memory and banished from his kingdom, but a quiet, unseen protector, working from the shadows to undermine Draven's schemes and safeguard the pack she had grown to genuinely care about, even without anyone within the castle ever knowing her true identity. She began small, using information she had already gathered about the rerouted shipments and the southern gold coins to anonymously alert several trusted merchants and lower town officials about suspicious patterns worth investigating. She used Mira's careful network of servants to continue passing information back and forth, gathering updates about Draven's activities within the castle, while providing occasional guidance about where his schemes might be vulnerable to disruption. Weeks passed, and slowly, carefully, Elena's shadow network began to grow. Word spread quietly through certain trusted circles about a mysterious figure working against Draven's influence, someone with detailed knowledge of his activities that seemed almost impossibly precise, though no one could identify exactly who this hidden protector truly was. Elena remained careful never to reveal too much about herself, always operating through intermediaries, always ensuring her identity remained completely separate from the queen, who had supposedly abandoned her husband and disappeared from the kingdom entirely. It was exhausting, dangerous work, made all the more difficult by the strange, hollow ache she still carried from everything the spell had cost her, the fading echo of feelings she once held for Cale, now distant and unreachable, despite the facts of their marriage remaining clear in her memory. But even as that ache lingered, Elena found unexpected purpose in her new role, a sense of agency and control she had rarely felt during her 6 months as a dutiful, largely ignored queen within the castle walls. Here, working from the shadows, she was not defined by her marriage or her usefulness in political alliances. She was defined entirely by her own choices, her own determination to protect a kingdom, and a man who no longer even knew she existed. She did not know, as those first weeks in Millbrook stretched into a full month, that her efforts had already begun drawing attention within the castle itself, attention from a king increasingly troubled by an inexplicable sense that something important was missing from his life. Though he could not begin to explain what, or why, the feeling seemed to intensify every time reports reached him about a mysterious, unseen ally working quietly against threats to his kingdom. Cale noticed the emptiness before he noticed anything else. It began as a vague unease, the kind of feeling that settles into a person's chest without explanation, like walking into a familiar room and sensing something has been rearranged, though nothing appears out of place. He found himself standing in doorways sometimes, uncertain why he had walked there in the first place. He found himself glancing toward the private courtyard outside his study more often than usual, as though expecting to see someone standing near the low stone wall, though he could never explain who he expected to find there. His council members noticed the change in him first, commenting quietly among themselves about the king's increasingly distracted demeanor, his tendency to trail off mid-sentence during important discussions, staring at nothing in particular before catching himself and continuing as though nothing unusual had happened. Draven, watching these developments with careful attention, felt a growing sense of satisfaction. The spell had worked exactly as promised. Cale showed no conscious memory of ever having a wife, no recollection of the marriage arranged to secure the eastern trade routes, no awareness that anyone named Elena had ever existed within these castle walls. But something else had begun happening that Draven had not anticipated, something that troubled him more than he cared to admit. Cale's unease was not fading with time, as Draven had assumed it would once the initial disorientation of the spell settled. Instead, it seemed to deepen, growing more persistent with each passing week, manifesting in small, strange ways that Draven found increasingly difficult to explain away. The king had begun asking unusual questions during council meetings. Questions about the castle's recent history, about decisions made over the past 6 months that he could not fully account for in his own memory. He asked about a particular silver pendant he vaguely recalled once owning, unable to explain why he felt certain it had once belonged to him, though he could not remember when or why he had lost it. He grew agitated whenever discussions touched on the eastern trade routes, insisting something about the arrangement felt incomplete, though he could not articulate what specifically bothered him. Most concerning to Draven, Cale had begun personally investigating reports of a mysterious figure working against various threats to the kingdom's stability, a shadow protector whose interventions had already disrupted several of Draven's carefully planned schemes over the past month. The king's interest in this mysterious ally seemed to border on obsession, far beyond simple curiosity about someone helping protect his kingdom. "You seem troubled, my king," Draven said one evening, finding Cale once again standing near the private courtyard outside his study, staring toward the eastern hills with the same distracted, searching expression that had become increasingly common over recent weeks. Cale did not turn immediately, his gaze remaining fixed on the horizon. "Do you ever feel, Draven, as though something important has slipped away from you, something you should remember clearly, but cannot quite grasp, no matter how hard you try?" Draven kept his expression carefully neutral, though internally, alarm bells rang sharply at the king's words. "Everyone experiences moments of forgetfulness, my king. The demands of ruling a kingdom leave little room for dwelling on smaller matters." "This does not feel like ordinary forgetfulness," Cale said, finally turning to face him, his amber eyes sharp with genuine concern, despite the confusion clouding his expression. "It feels as though a piece of myself is missing entirely, something significant, and I cannot begin to explain the feeling to anyone, because I do not even know what I am supposed to be remembering." Draven considered his words carefully before responding. "Perhaps you are simply overworked, my king. The pressures of the southern border tensions, combined with the ongoing investigation into these mysterious disruptions to our operations, would leave any ruler feeling scattered and uncertain." "Perhaps," Cale said, though his tone suggested he remained unconvinced. He turned back toward the horizon, his expression thoughtful. "This mysterious ally, the one disrupting your operations and protecting our kingdom's interests from the shadows. Have your investigations uncovered anything more about their identity?" "Nothing conclusive," Draven admitted, careful to keep frustration from his voice. In truth, his investigators had spent weeks trying to identify the source of the increasingly precise interventions against his schemes, without success. Whoever this mysterious protector was, they operated with a level of caution and careful planning that suggested intimate knowledge of Draven's own methods and patterns, knowledge that troubled him more than he wanted to acknowledge. "I want this pursued more aggressively," Cale said, his voice carrying the authority Draven had grown accustomed to over years of service beneath him. "Whoever this person is, they clearly possess valuable insight into threats facing this kingdom. I want them found, and I want to understand why their interventions feel so familiar to me, though I cannot explain the sensation." Draven bowed slightly, masking his growing unease behind practiced deference. "As you wish, my king." As Draven left the courtyard that evening, his mind raced through the implications of everything Cale had just revealed. The old bonding magic was supposed to be absolute, erasing not only specific memories but any trace of emotional connection or recognition tied to the person removed. Yet here was Cale, weeks after the spell's completion, experiencing persistent, unexplainable unease, directly connected to the very void where his wife's memory should have existed. Draven had never fully trusted the old texts he encouraged Elena to use during her preparation, understanding them only partially himself, relying on her deeper knowledge of the ancient dialect to guide the ritual's proper execution. Now he found himself wondering, with growing unease, whether something had gone wrong during the spell's performance, whether Elena had somehow manipulated the ritual in ways he had not anticipated, leaving behind fragments of connection the magic was supposed to sever completely. Or worse, whether Elena herself had survived her banishment and was somehow, impossibly, connected to the mysterious shadow protector, currently disrupting his carefully laid plans across the kingdom. The thought seemed almost too coincidental to dismiss entirely, though Draven had no concrete evidence connecting the two. Elena had been escorted deep into the eastern wilderness weeks ago, and reports from his own men indicated she had escaped their custody during the third night of travel, vanishing into the surrounding forest without a trace. Draven had assumed, given the harsh terrain and her lack of survival skills, that she had likely perished within days of her escape, either from exposure or from the various dangers that stalked the wilderness beyond the Hollow's protected borders. But if she had somehow survived, if she had found her way to safety, and begun working against him from the shadows using the very knowledge she had gathered during her original investigation. The implications were deeply troubling. Not only had his plans been disrupted repeatedly over the past month by someone with intimate knowledge of his operations, but Cale's persistent, unexplainable unease might not simply be a flaw in the spell's execution, but rather evidence that the woman he had erased from his memory remained alive and actively working to undermine everything Draven had built toward. He needed to know for certain, and he needed to eliminate the possibility entirely, one way or another, before Cale's growing suspicion and persistent unease led him toward truths that could unravel everything Draven had worked so carefully to construct. That night, Draven summoned two of his most trusted allies from among the southern territories, men who had proven themselves capable of handling delicate, dangerous tasks without hesitation or unnecessary questions. "I need you to find someone," he told them, spreading a rough map of the eastern territories across his private study desk. "A woman, likely traveling under a different name, possibly settled somewhere within the border settlements near Millbrook or the surrounding villages. She may be working through intermediaries, gathering information, and passing it along through a network of trusted contacts." "And if we find her?" one of the men asked, his expression carefully neutral. Draven's eyes hardened. "Then you ensure she never interferes with our plans again, permanently, and without any possibility of the king ever learning what truly happened to his forgotten wife." The two men nodded and departed into the night, beginning a search that would eventually bring Elena's carefully constructed shadow network into direct, dangerous confrontation with the very man she had sacrificed everything to protect the kingdom against. Meanwhile, unaware of the search now underway, Elena continued her quiet work from Millbrook, her network of trusted contacts growing steadily more effective at disrupting Draven's schemes with each passing week. She had recently learned, through careful intelligence gathered by old Garrick's eastern connections, that Draven was planning a significant move against the kingdom's northern grain reserves, a scheme that would leave the Hollow dangerously vulnerable heading into the approaching winter season. She spent long hours each evening, working through the details of Draven's plan, searching for the best way to expose and disrupt it, without revealing too much about her own network's methods or capabilities. It was delicate, dangerous work, made all the more difficult by the persistent ache she still carried from everything the spell had cost her. The strange, hollow distance she now felt when thinking about Cale, facts remaining clear in her memory, while genuine emotional connection remained frustratingly, permanently out of reach. She did not know, as she worked late into another quiet evening in Millbrook, that her careful anonymity was already beginning to unravel, that Draven's search for her had already begun, and that the very success of her shadow network in protecting the kingdom was about to bring her into far more direct and dangerous confrontation with the man determined to see her permanently silenced. The first sign of danger came 3 weeks later, in the form of a hurried message from Mira, passed along through the careful chain of trusted contacts Elena had built since arriving in Millbrook. Draven's men were asking questions in the border settlements, the message warned, searching specifically for a woman, matching Elena's description, offering substantial rewards for any information leading to her location. Elena read the message twice, her stomach tightening with a familiar cold dread. She had known, from the very beginning of her shadow campaign against Draven, that discovery remained a constant risk, that her network's growing success would eventually draw unwanted attention. But knowing the risk existed in theory felt very different from confronting the reality that Draven's search had already reached dangerously close to her current location. She spent that evening carefully weighing her options. She could flee further east, deeper into unfamiliar territory, putting greater distance between herself and Draven's reach, but doing so would likely sever the careful network of contacts she had spent weeks building, undermining months of progress toward protecting the kingdom from his schemes. Or she could remain in Millbrook, taking additional precautions to protect her identity while continuing her work, accepting the growing risk in exchange for maintaining the connections that made her efforts effective. She chose to remain, though not without significant additional caution. She began varying her routines more carefully, relying even more heavily on trusted intermediaries rather than direct contact, and ensuring Leora's apothecary shop, where she had been staying, showed no obvious signs suggesting a hidden guest matching Draven's description. But even as she took these precautions, Elena found herself increasingly drawn toward a different kind of risk entirely, one that had nothing to do with Draven's search parties, and everything to do with the persistent reports reaching her through Mira's network about Kale's own growing investigation into the mysterious Shadow Protector, working against threats to his kingdom. According to Mira's careful updates, Kale had become personally invested in identifying this unknown ally, dedicating increasing amounts of his own time and resources toward the search, driven by what several council members privately described as an almost obsessive fascination that seemed to go beyond simple gratitude for the Protector's helpful interventions. Elena told herself she should avoid any direct contact with Kale's investigation entirely, that maintaining her anonymity meant staying as far removed from his personal attention as possible. But as reports continued arriving about his growing preoccupation with uncovering her true identity, she found herself increasingly unable to resist the pull toward closer involvement, toward opportunities that might bring her into his orbit once again, even if he remained entirely unaware of who she truly was. The opportunity arrived sooner than she expected, in the form of an urgent warning from her network about an imminent attack planned against a small trading caravan traveling through the Eastern Territories, carrying supplies desperately needed to help offset the grain shortage Draven's earlier scheme had already caused within the kingdom's northern settlements. The caravan's planned route would take it directly through territory close to Millbrook, and Elena's intelligence suggested Draven intended to have the caravan intercepted, and its supplies redirected toward his southern allies, worsening the kingdom's already precarious food situation heading into winter. Elena recognized immediately that stopping this attack would require more direct intervention than her network had typically employed, something beyond simply passing anonymous warnings through intermediaries. The timing was too tight, the danger too immediate, for her usual careful, indirect methods. She made the decision quickly, gathering what supplies she could, and setting out toward the caravan's projected route, determined to intervene personally if necessary, to protect the desperately needed grain supplies from Draven's scheme. What she did not anticipate, as she made her way carefully through the eastern wilderness toward the caravan's path, was that Kale himself had also received word of the planned attack through his own intelligence network, and had decided, against his council's strong objections, to personally lead a small group of trusted guards to intercept the threat and protect the caravan directly. Elena arrived at the ambush site first, finding a narrow forest pass where Draven's men had clearly positioned themselves to intercept the approaching caravan. She counted at least 6 armed figures hidden among the trees lining the pass, more than she could hope to handle alone, but she had already sent word ahead to Old Garrick's network, hoping additional support might arrive before the caravan itself reached the danger zone. She positioned herself carefully at the pass's edge, watching for any opportunity to disrupt the ambush or provide warning before violence erupted, when the sound of approaching horses reached her ears from the opposite direction, moving quickly along a parallel path that would intersect with the ambush site within minutes. Her heart pounded as she recognized, even from this distance, the distinctive banner carried by the lead rider, the Hollow's royal crest, marking this as no ordinary patrol, but Kale's own personal guard, moving directly toward the same danger she had been trying to prevent alone. She had only seconds to decide how to respond. If she remained hidden, allowing events to unfold without her intervention, Kale's group might ride directly into Draven's ambush without warning, facing far greater danger than the merchant caravan alone would have encountered. But revealing herself meant risking exposure, potentially undoing months of careful anonymity, and confronting directly the man who no longer remembered anything about the wife he had once shared 6 difficult months of marriage with. Elena chose protection over caution. She moved quickly through the forest undergrowth, positioning herself along the path Kale's group was approaching, and as the lead riders came into view, she stepped out from the tree line, waving urgently to catch their attention before they rode further into the danger ahead. The lead rider called for the group to halt, and Elena found herself face to face with Kale for the first time since the night she had erased herself from his memory, standing before him now, as a complete stranger in his eyes, though her own heart raced with the weight of everything she remembered about the man watching her with sharp, cautious curiosity from atop his horse. "Identify yourself," Kale called out, his hand resting near the blade at his hip, though his tone carried more curiosity than immediate hostility. "There is an ambush ahead," Elena said quickly, keeping her voice steady, despite the overwhelming strangeness of standing before him as a stranger. Armed men, positioned along the forest pass, waiting to intercept a caravan carrying grain supplies. If you continue forward without caution, you will ride directly into their trap. Cale studied her carefully, his amber eyes sharp with the same intense focus she remembered from countless council meetings, though now directed entirely at a woman he had never, as far as his conscious memory could tell him, encountered before in his life. "How do you know this?" he asked. Elena hesitated, aware that her answer needed to protect both her network's continued effectiveness and her own carefully maintained anonymity. "I have been tracking suspicious activity in this region for some time," she said carefully. "I believe you may already be somewhat familiar with my efforts, even if not directly with myself." Something shifted in Cale's expression, a flicker of recognition that had nothing to do with actual memory and everything to do with sudden, dawning realization. "You are the one," he said slowly, studying her with new intensity. "The shadow protector my investigators have been searching for these past weeks." Elena said nothing, neither confirming nor denying his conclusion, though her silence spoke clearly enough. Cale dismounted quickly, closing the distance between them despite the concerned protests of his guards, who clearly worried about their king approaching an unknown, potentially dangerous stranger without proper caution. He stopped only a few feet away, studying her face with an intensity that made Elena's pulse quicken uncomfortably, as though some part of him, despite everything the spell had erased, recognized something familiar in her features that he could not fully explain. "Why?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying genuine confusion rather than accusation. "Why would you risk your own safety, protecting a kingdom that has no idea who you are, working from the shadows, without any recognition or reward for your efforts?" Elena held his gaze steadily, feeling the ache of everything she remembered and everything he had forgotten, pressing heavily against her chest. "Because this kingdom deserves protection," she said finally, "regardless of whether anyone knows who provides it." Before Cale could respond further, the sound of clashing steel erupted from the forest pass ahead, signaling that Draven's ambush had been triggered, likely by the approaching caravan. Elena's earlier warning had failed to reach in time. Cale's expression hardened immediately, the strange, searching curiosity replaced by sharp, focused urgency. "We need to move," he said, turning back toward his guards. "Now." Elena found herself swept into the sudden chaos of the moment, following as Cale's group rushed toward the sounds of battle ahead, uncertain exactly what role she would play in the confrontation about to unfold, but certain, absolutely certain, that she could not simply stand aside while danger threatened both the caravan and the man she had sacrificed everything to protect. By the time they reached the forest pass, the caravan drivers had already managed to organize a defensive position, using their wagons as makeshift barriers, while Draven's ambush party pressed forward from the surrounding trees. Cale's guards moved quickly to reinforce the caravan's defense, and within minutes, the combination of trained warriors and desperate merchants proved too much for the ambush party to overcome. Draven's men, recognizing the shifting balance of the confrontation, began retreating back into the forest, abandoning their attempt to seize the grain supplies rather than risk capture or serious injury against Cale's superior numbers. Within a quarter hour, the immediate danger had passed, the caravan secured, and Cale's guards moved through the surrounding area, ensuring no lingering threats remained, before allowing the merchants to continue their journey safely toward the northern settlements. Elena had remained close to the fighting's edge throughout the brief confrontation, using her knowledge of the terrain to help guide several of Cale's guards toward better defensive positions, though she carefully avoided direct combat herself, understanding that her value to this cause came from information and strategy rather than physical confrontation. As the immediate danger settled and the caravan prepared to continue its journey, Cale sought her out again, finding her near the edge of the clearing where the brief battle had unfolded, checking quietly on one of the merchant drivers who had suffered a minor injury during the confrontation. "You have my gratitude," he said, approaching carefully, though the same intense curiosity from earlier still lingered in his expression. "Without your warning, this could have ended very differently." "I am simply glad the caravan and your guards remain safe," Elena said, keeping her voice carefully neutral, despite the storm of conflicting emotions churning beneath her composed exterior. Cale studied her a moment longer, then glanced back toward his waiting guards before returning his attention to her. "I would like to speak with you further, if you are willing. Not here, in the middle of a forest pass with the immediate danger only just resolved, but somewhere we can discuss more carefully everything you seem to know about the threats facing this kingdom." Elena's heart raced at the invitation, torn between the desperate desire to remain close to him, to continue this strange, unexpected reconnection, even without his conscious memory of who she truly was, and the equally strong awareness that continued proximity carried significant risk, both to her carefully maintained anonymity and to the fragile emotional balance she had worked so hard to establish since the spell's completion. "I understand your interest," she said carefully, "but my effectiveness has always depended on remaining unseen, working from the shadows rather than direct involvement. I am not certain that changing this approach now would serve either of our interests well." "Perhaps not," Cale said, though his expression suggested he was not entirely satisfied with her careful deflection. "But I find myself increasingly troubled by questions I cannot fully explain, questions that seem connected somehow to your presence, though I could not tell you exactly why." Elena's breath caught, uncertain how much he suspected, how close his instinctive unease had already brought him toward truths he had no conscious memory to explain. "What kind of questions?" she asked carefully. Cale hesitated, his expression thoughtful, almost vulnerable in a way Elena rarely witnessed from him, even during their 6 months of marriage. "For weeks now, I have felt as though something significant is missing from my life, some piece of myself I cannot fully account for. When I encountered you today, that feeling intensified considerably, though I cannot explain why a stranger would trigger such a strong, unexplainable reaction." Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the bittersweet weight of standing before him, hearing him describe the very echo she had hoped, desperately, might survive the spell's completion, while knowing she could not simply explain the truth without risking everything her sacrifice had been meant to protect. "I cannot answer that question for you," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled despite the emotion threatening to break through. "But I can tell you that sometimes, the feelings we cannot explain deserve trust, even without clear answers to justify them." Cale studied her expression carefully, something in his own face softening slightly at her words, though confusion still lingered clearly behind his amber eyes. "Will I see you again?" he asked, his tone carrying more vulnerability than Elena had ever witnessed from him during their entire formal marriage. "Perhaps," Elena said, offering the only honest answer she could manage given everything at stake. "If circumstances require it, I imagine our paths will cross again." She excused herself before he could press further, moving quickly back into the surrounding forest, before her composure fully broke under the weight of everything unspoken between them. She needed distance, needed time to process the overwhelming reality of standing before him again, of witnessing firsthand the strange, persistent echo of connection that had somehow survived the spell despite everything the old text suggested should have been erased completely. Over the following weeks, Elena found herself caught in an increasingly difficult balance between continuing her essential work, protecting the kingdom from Draven's schemes, and managing the growing complication of Cale's determined efforts to identify and connect with the mysterious ally who had helped save the caravan and protect his kingdom's interests on multiple occasions. Their paths crossed several more times during this period, always briefly, always carefully managed by Elena to avoid revealing too much about her true identity, though each encounter left her more emotionally exhausted than the last, caught between the desperate desire to reveal everything and the fierce protective instinct that had driven her original sacrifice in the first place. Draven, meanwhile, grew increasingly desperate as his schemes continued unraveling under the persistent interference of Elena's shadow network, combined with Cale's own growing personal investment in identifying and understanding the mysterious protector, working against every attempt to weaken the kingdom from within. His search parties had failed repeatedly to locate Elena's true identity or location, hampered by the careful anonymity she maintained, even as her direct involvement in protecting the kingdom increased. But Draven was not a man easily deterred by repeated failure, and as his frustration mounted, his methods grew increasingly reckless and dangerous, driven by a desperate need to eliminate the threat to his carefully constructed plans, before it could unravel everything he had worked toward. It was during this period of mounting tension and increasingly desperate maneuvering from all sides that Draven finally received the piece of information he had been searching for, since first suspecting Elena's survival and continued interference in his affairs. One of his southern allies, moving through the border settlements gathering intelligence, reported overhearing a conversation at Leora's apothecary shop in Millbrook that suggested the shop's owner maintained close, trusted ties to someone matching Elena's description, someone who had been staying quietly in the settlement for several months, while conducting mysterious business that seemed to align closely with the pattern of disruptions plaguing Draven's operations. Armed with this information, Draven moved quickly and decisively, gathering a group of his most trusted and capable allies for a direct assault on Millbrook, determined to finally locate and eliminate the threat Elena represented before her continued interference could completely unravel his carefully constructed plans against the kingdom. He did not inform Kael of his intentions, understanding clearly that the king's growing, unexplainable fascination with the mysterious protector would likely result in interference if his true purpose became known. Instead, he claimed urgent business requiring his personal attention in the Eastern Territories, departing the castle under the cover of routine diplomatic obligations, while secretly preparing for a confrontation he intended to end permanently, once and for all, the persistent threat to everything he had worked to build. Elena, unaware of the danger rapidly approaching Millbrook, continued her careful work throughout these tense weeks, gathering intelligence about Draven's increasingly desperate movements, while maintaining the delicate balance between protecting the kingdom and managing her complicated, ongoing connection to Kael himself. She did not know, as she settled into another quiet evening working through the latest reports from her network, that Draven's search had finally succeeded, that his forces were even now moving steadily toward Millbrook with clear, deadly intent, and that the confrontation building steadily between them for months was about to reach its most dangerous and decisive moment yet. The warning came too late. Elena was reviewing reports late into the evening when Leora burst into the small back room where she had been staying, her expression tight with fear. "Riders," she said breathlessly, approaching from the western road, moving fast. I recognized one of the banners. It belongs to Draven's southern allies. Elena's blood ran cold as she rose quickly from her chair, gathering the scattered reports and stuffing them hastily into a leather satchel. "How much time do we have?" "Minutes, not hours," Leora said. "You need to leave now, through the back passage. I will delay them as long as I can." "No," Elena said firmly, though her heart pounded with fear. "If Draven has found us, delaying will not save you. You need to leave with me. Now." They moved quickly through the settlement's narrow back streets, but Draven's forces had clearly planned their approach carefully, positioning riders at multiple points around Millbrook's perimeter to prevent exactly this kind of escape. Within minutes, Elena and Leora found themselves cornered near the settlement's eastern edge, surrounded by armed riders closing in from multiple directions. Draven himself emerged from among the approaching riders, his expression carrying grim satisfaction as he finally laid eyes on the woman who had spent months disrupting his carefully constructed plans. "Lady Elena," he said, his voice carrying across the tense space between them. "I must confess, I did not expect our reunion to take quite this long to arrange. You should have let this end when I first left the Hollow," Elena said, positioning herself protectively between Draven's men and Leora, refusing to let fear show through despite the overwhelming danger surrounding them. "I would have," Draven replied, "if you had simply disappeared as intended, rather than building an entire network dedicated to unraveling everything I have worked toward. You have become considerably more troublesome than I anticipated, Lady Elena." Elena's mind raced, searching desperately for any possible path forward that did not end in disaster for herself and everyone connected to her careful shadow network. "Whatever you intend to do here," she said, keeping her voice steady, "know that others already possess the information I have gathered. My network will continue, regardless of what happens to me tonight." Draven's expression flickered with something that might have been genuine respect, quickly replaced by cold determination. "Perhaps, but without your direct involvement, without your knowledge of the old magic and your continued interference, I imagine my remaining plans will proceed considerably more smoothly." He gestured to his men, who began closing the remaining distance, and Elena understood, with sudden clarity, that this confrontation was about to become far more dangerous than any of their previous encounters had been. What none of them anticipated As the tension in that narrow street stretched toward its breaking point, was the sound of additional riders approaching rapidly from the opposite direction, moving with the kind of coordinated urgency that suggested trained warriors rather than another group of Draven's mercenary allies. Cale arrived at exactly the moment Draven's men began to move, his own guards flanking him as he took in the scene before him, with sharp, immediate understanding. Word had reached him only hours earlier, through channels he had quietly established himself, that Draven had departed the castle under suspicious pretenses, moving toward the eastern territories with a larger force than any routine diplomatic mission would require. His own growing suspicions about his most trusted Beta, suspicions that had been building steadily over recent weeks, alongside his unexplainable fascination with the mysterious protector, had driven him to follow, arriving now at precisely the moment his instincts had warned him something significant was about to unfold. "Draven," Cale said, his voice carrying across the tense street with unmistakable authority. "Explain yourself." Draven's expression shifted rapidly, calculation replacing surprise, as he assessed this unexpected complication to his plans. "My king," he said, his voice carefully controlled despite the obvious tension in his posture. "I did not expect you to follow. This matter does not concern you directly. A confrontation involving armed men surrounding two unarmed women in a peaceful settlement concerns me very directly," Cale said, his gaze moving between Draven and Elena, recognition flickering across his features, as he finally, fully connected this moment to the woman who had haunted his unexplainable sense of loss for weeks. "It is you," he said quietly, stepping closer, despite Draven's obvious discomfort with the development. "The Protector. What is happening here, and why does my most trusted Beta appear to be threatening you with armed men?" Before Elena could formulate a careful response that might protect both herself and the delicate political situation unfolding, Draven made a decision that would ultimately unravel everything he had worked to construct. "She is dangerous, my king," Draven said quickly. "A traitor who has been working against the kingdom's interests for months, using stolen knowledge of forbidden magic to manipulate events from the shadows. I have been trying to stop her before her interference causes serious harm." "That is not true," Elena said firmly, refusing to let his accusation stand unchallenged. "Everything I have done has been in service of protecting this kingdom from threats orchestrated by Draven himself, the rerouted shipments, the southern gold coins paid to loyal guards, the planned ambush against the grain caravan. All of it traces directly back to him." Cale's expression hardened as he studied Draven carefully, years of trust and mentorship warring visibly against the mounting evidence Elena had just presented. "These are serious accusations," he said slowly, "ones that deserve careful investigation, not resolution through armed confrontation in the middle of a peaceful settlement." "My king," Draven said, his composure beginning to crack under the weight of the situation spiraling beyond his control. "You do not understand the full context of this matter. There are things about this woman, about her history within your own castle, that would explain everything if you simply allowed me to handle this privately." Elena felt her heart pound painfully at Draven's words, understanding the dangerous threat implicit in his suggestion, the possibility that he might reveal fragments of the truth about her identity in a desperate attempt to salvage his position, though twisted and reframed to serve his own interests rather than reveal the genuine sacrifice she had made. "What history?" Cale asked, his gaze moving between Draven and Elena with growing suspicion. "What are you not telling me?" The tension in that narrow street stretched to its breaking point, every person present understanding that the next few moments would determine not only Elena's immediate safety, but the fate of the truth she had sacrificed so much to protect, and the future of a kingdom, balanced precariously on the edge of revelations no one present could fully control. Draven hesitated, caught between the desperate need to salvage some version of the situation and the growing realization that his careful plans had finally, completely unraveled. In that moment of hesitation, one of his own men, sensing the shifting balance of power and unwilling to face the consequences of continued loyalty to a clearly failing scheme, stepped forward with unexpected words that changed everything. "My king," the man said, lowering his weapon and kneeling before Cale, with obvious fear, "I can tell you everything. Beta Draven has been working with southern allies for months, planning to weaken this kingdom from within. He arranged for the Lady Elena's banishment through forced magic, using an ancient spell to erase your memory of her existence entirely. The words landed in that narrow street like a physical blow. Kale went completely still, his expression shifting rapidly from confusion to disbelief to something far more complex, as the full weight of the revelation began settling over him. "Elena," he said quietly, testing the name, as though searching for some buried recognition beneath the surface of his conscious awareness. He turned to look at her directly, really look at her, his amber eyes searching her face with desperate intensity. "That is your name, my wife." Elena felt tears finally breaking free despite her efforts to maintain composure. Months of carefully controlled grief and longing, overwhelming her defenses in this single, devastating moment of partial recognition. "Yes," she whispered. "I do not remember you," Kale said, his voice carrying genuine anguish beneath the confusion. "I do not remember our marriage, our time together, anything specific about who you are to me. But I have felt your absence every single day for months, this persistent, unexplainable sense that something essential was missing from my life. That was you. That emptiness was always you." Draven, recognizing that the situation had spiraled completely beyond any hope of recovery, made one final, desperate attempt to escape the growing circle of Kale's guards, now closing in around him. But he found himself quickly surrounded, his remaining loyal men either fleeing or surrendering, as the true scope of his betrayal became clear to everyone present. "Take him into custody," Kale ordered, his voice carrying cold authority despite the emotional turmoil clearly evident beneath his controlled exterior. "He will answer for every crime committed against this kingdom, and against my wife." As his guards moved to secure Draven and his remaining men, Kale turned his full attention back to Elena, closing the remaining distance between them with careful, deliberate steps, as though approaching something fragile and precious he was afraid of, somehow damaging through careless movement. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. "Please, I need to understand what happened, what you sacrificed, and why." Elena took a steadying breath, aware that everyone present, Leora, Kale's guards, even the settlement residents drawn by the commotion, waited to hear the full truth finally revealed, after months of careful secrecy and sacrifice. "I overheard Draven's conspiracy months ago," she began, her voice growing steadier, as she found her footing in finally sharing the story she had carried alone for so long. "When I tried to warn you, you did not believe me, so I gathered evidence myself, and Draven caught me investigating him. He forced me to choose between death and erasing myself from your memory, believing it would prevent you from ever discovering his betrayal, or searching for reasons behind my sudden disappearance. And you chose to protect me," Kale said softly. "Even though I had dismissed your warning, even though protecting me meant losing everything between us." "I chose to protect this kingdom," Elena said, "and yes, protecting you specifically mattered to me, more than I ever admitted, even to myself, before that night." Kale reached out slowly, hesitantly, as though seeking permission before gently taking her hand in his own. "I do not have my memories of loving you," he said, his voice carrying genuine vulnerability she had rarely witnessed from him, even during their original marriage. "But I have felt your absence so deeply these past months that I sought you out repeatedly, drawn toward you, without understanding why, trusting you instinctively, even as a complete stranger. If that is not some form of love surviving beyond memory itself, I do not know what else to call it." Elena felt something shift within her chest, a fragile, tentative hope beginning to take root, despite everything she had sacrificed and lost. "There may be a way to restore what the spell erased," she said carefully. "The old text mentioned that true bonds could sometimes be restored, though the process would require time, and there is no certainty it would succeed completely." "Then we will try," Kale said without hesitation. "Whatever time and effort it requires. I want to remember everything I lost. I want to know the woman who sacrificed so much to protect a kingdom, and a husband, who did not even believe her warning in the first place." In the weeks that followed, as Draven faced formal justice for his crimes against the kingdom, and his southern allies retreated in disarray without their inside connection to exploit, Elena and Kale began the slow, careful process of rebuilding what the spell had erased. She shared stories from their 6 months of marriage, small details and larger moments alike, watching carefully for any sign of genuine recognition beneath his attentive, curious listening. Progress came slowly at first, small flickers of recollection triggered by specific details. A particular phrase Elena used, the location of certain private conversations they had once shared, the memory of the silver pendant he had given her during their wedding ceremony, which sparked a moment of genuine startled recognition when she described it in careful detail. "I remember choosing that pendant," Cale said one evening, several weeks into their careful rebuilding process, his expression caught somewhere between wonder and lingering confusion. "I remember standing in the lower town jeweler's shop, trying to select something meaningful for a wedding that felt entirely political and impersonal, and choosing that particular design because it reminded me of loyalty, of belonging, values I hoped our marriage might eventually embody, despite its arranged beginnings." Elena felt tears gathering as she listened, recognizing in his words the same quiet hope she herself had carried throughout their difficult, dutiful marriage, hope she had never known he shared until this very moment. "You never told me that," she said softly. "I never told you many things," Cale admitted, his expression carrying genuine regret. "I was so focused on the burdens of ruling, on maintaining the careful distance I believed necessary for effective leadership, that I failed to recognize what was developing between us, until it was almost entirely lost. I am sorry, Elena, for dismissing your warning that day in the throne room, for every quiet moment I failed to acknowledge or appreciate throughout our marriage, for the sacrifice you were forced to make because I could not see clearly what was happening around me." "You could not have known," Elena said gently. "Draven was careful, trusted, exactly the kind of threat that succeeds precisely because no one expects betrayal from someone so deeply woven into the fabric of trust and loyalty." Their careful rebuilding continued over the following months, memories gradually returning through patient, deliberate effort, though Cale would later admit that some fragments never fully returned to conscious clarity, remaining instead as vague impressions and emotional echoes, rather than complete, detailed recollection. But what did return, what grew steadily stronger through their shared commitment to rebuilding what had been lost, proved more significant than complete memory alone. They built something new together, a relationship no longer defined purely by political arrangement and dutiful distance, but by genuine partnership forged through crisis, sacrifice, and the deliberate choice to rebuild trust and connection, even without full certainty of what exactly had been lost along the way. Cale formally acknowledged Elena's role in protecting the kingdom before his full council, ensuring her sacrifice and contribution would never again be dismissed or overlooked, as it had been that difficult day in the throne room months earlier. The shadow network she had built during her months of exile was gradually integrated into the kingdom's formal intelligence operations, with Elena herself taking a leading role in ensuring threats like Draven's betrayal could be identified and addressed more effectively in the future. Draven's fate was decided through formal pact justice. His years of service weighed carefully against the severity of his betrayal, resulting in permanent exile from the Hollow's territories, stripped of all rank and privilege, forbidden from ever again holding position of trust within any pact aligned with the kingdom he had tried to undermine. As winter finally arrived, months after Elena's original desperate sacrifice in that cold ritual chamber, she stood once again, in the same private courtyard, where she had first tested whether any echo of connection survived the spell's completion, watching Cale approach with a small, carefully wrapped item, held gently in his hands. "I had this made," he said, offering her the small package with an expression carrying equal parts hope and vulnerability. "I could not recover the original, but I described it as best I could, drawing from the fragments of memory that have slowly returned." Elena opened the package carefully, finding inside a new silver pendant, shaped like a wolf's paw, nearly identical to the one she had sacrificed during the spell's completion, though subtle differences in the craftsmanship revealed it as genuinely new, rather than simply recovered. "It will never replace what was lost," Cale said quietly, "but perhaps it can represent something new instead. Not simply a return to what we had before, but a deliberate choice to build something stronger, with full awareness now of exactly what such connection costs, and exactly what it means to protect and be protected by someone willing to sacrifice everything for the people and the kingdom they genuinely care about." Elena held the pendant carefully, feeling the weight of everything she had sacrificed and everything she had ultimately gained through months of careful, determined effort to protect a kingdom and a husband who had not initially believed her warning, but who had ultimately proven himself worthy of the sacrifice she had chosen to make. "Thank you," she said softly, allowing him to fasten the pendant carefully around her neck, the silver catching the last light of the setting winter sun. I discovered why you mattered too late to prevent your sacrifice, Cale said quietly, his hand lingering gently against her shoulder. But I intend to spend whatever years remain to us, ensuring that lesson is never forgotten, that your worth, and the depth of love capable of surviving even the erasure of memory itself, receives every acknowledgement and appreciation it deserves. Elena smiled, the first genuinely peaceful smile she had allowed herself in many difficult months, and together, they turned to watch the winter sun set fully behind the eastern hills, two people who had lost everything, and slowly, carefully, rebuilt something even stronger from the fragments left behind. The kingdom moved forward into a new season, stronger and more secure than it had been in years, protected not only by careful political alliance, but by the genuine, hard-won partnership between a king who had finally learned to trust fully, and a queen whose sacrifice had proven, ultimately, that some bonds prove strong enough to survive, even against magic designed specifically to erase them entirely.